Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Inbox Answers, the webinar presented by ZeroBounce. Here we are at episode 5 of 7, past the halfway point. I'm Paul Leslie, brand and PR specialist here at ZeroBounce. Please, everyone, feel free to use that chat there to the right. Let me know, have you been to more than one of these Inbox Answers? And where are you joining us from? I would love to know. We're going to wait just a couple minutes. There's usually some people coming in a little late. All right. I see Holly joining us from Austin. Gabby, first timer in Mexico. Ryan joining us from Chicago. Peter joining us from Belgium. Welcome, welcome all. Good to have people in lots of different time zones here. And to tell you a little bit about ZeroBounce, many of you are no stranger to ZeroBounce. We are helping you to reach the inbox. Now, many of those brands that you see there represented on the screen, they need no introduction. But at this point, I can guarantee you there are emails sitting in your inbox right now that were verified by ZeroBounce. We have verified billions of email addresses, and we're happy to do that for many well-known brands and including many of you. Just a little housekeeping here. Our most frequently asked question, yes, this webinar is being recorded. You're going to get a copy of it. It's also going to be archived on our YouTube channel. We recommend you subscribe over there and you can reference this at any time. Yes, we are holding a AMA, Ask Us Anything. You're going to notice that there's two chats there. There's this main chat, and then to the right, up top, you'll see another tab that says Q&A. Any questions you'd like to have Luke, who you're about to meet, answer, just put them in that Q&A tab and we will get to them. So we're going to be covering today email deliverability, email domains, what are they? Why use subdomains for email sending, how to get started with subdomains, and of course, we're going to get to your questions and answers. And it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Luke Glassner. He is an accessible, knowledgeable, and thoughtful diplomat of deliverability, all about shaking up the spam folder status quo. Let me bring Luke into the webinar.
Hello.
Hello, Luke.
Hello, Paul. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Well, Luke, I am excited to hear the information you're going to present, and I will see you at the end.
All right. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Luke Glasser, and today we're going to talk about how subdomains can help you in the battle of the inbox versus spam. So one of the things I'd like to stress here as we start out is that email deliverability, what is it and what's the difference between that and delivered, right? Delivered means your email was accepted by the recipient's server. It doesn't mean that it actually went to the inbox. An email that goes to the junk folder is considered delivered. So once it's delivered or accepted, then the mailbox provider decides where it's going to go. And, going to junk can definitely have a big impact on your engagement, on revenue, and where your future emails will place. So, and to be clear, promotions or newsletter tabs, other tabs within the inbox are all considered delivered to the inbox. The spam folder or junk folder, depending on what client you use, how they name it, is directly related is not considered the inbox. So those are two different things. And we'll continue on to our next slide. And we have our poll coming up. And our poll for this today is to ask how many of you are using subdomains for your emails now. I know for a lot of people, sometimes subdomains are required by their ESP. For example, I could think of a few off the top of my head. .digital's one, SendGrid usually uses them, HubSpot, Mailgun, there's lots of them. And there's often good reasons why they want you to use a subdomain. But even if your ESP is not requiring a subdomain, you can still use them to help keep your reputation clear. Because as we know in deliverability, sender reputation is everything, right? Every email you send impacts your reputation. And just like in the real world, it takes a long time to build a good reputation, but only a few missteps to take it back out. So the mailbox providers watch how they react to your emails. Some of those actions you can see, for example, opening clicks. However, there's a lot of other actions that you may not be able to see that have positive effects, like they're saving it, they're moving it around, they reply to it, they print it out, used to be one, things like that. At the same time, there's negative actions that you might not be able to see, such as they delete it unread, they don't ever open emails, or the worst by far is marking you as spam. Now, a spam complaint is probably one of the quickest ways to land in the junk folder. But even if you are not getting complaints, if you are going over time and having a lot of inactive, that makes it more likely where it's going to go. And today, ISPs are really focused on the domain reputation. So let's see. It looks like about half of you, those that have responded to our poll, about half of you are using subdomains at just shy of 53%, and the other half are not using them today. And by the end of this, you'll know how to do it, and also what are some good reasons why, so that you can make an informed decision about whether it's worth it to get into subdomains. Oh, now I see a few more people answering, and now no is pulling ahead. So let's continue on with our slides, and you can all continue. So what is a subdomain? So a subdomain, sometimes called a child domain, is attached to your main email domain or your main domain. A lot of times you will hear people call it a TLD for the main domain. That stands for top level domain. And then subdomains are underneath it. So the subdomain is good for separating specific mail streams like marketing versus cold outreach versus transactional mail. And in fact, transactional mail is probably where the practice of using subdomains originated. I remember years ago, it was not unusual for a website to have like a subdomain section, and that was like the storefront part separate from maybe the rest of the website or the order processing part. And then that would send transactional emails like, hey, we've received your order, or hey, your order is shipping, or things like that, using that subdomain. And that's probably where the use of subdomains in email originated, although I don't have any specific citations to note. And one of the reasons why this is important is ISPs will treat different subdomains differently. And I have definitely seen this within my own clients where a subdomain has a different reputation. For those of you that use Google Postmaster's tools, and remember when they used to have domain reputation in the original Postmaster tools, just up until just a few months ago, you could easily see that his main domain had one rep and the subdomain had another, and that they did actually rate them differently. So the ISPs do pay attention to this, and you can create different subdomains to separate streams of mail to protect certain extremely important types of mail. For example, your regular internal company mail, or maybe it's transactional things like order confirmations, password resets, creating an account, and there's some kind of code in there that you need to put in. One thing I will tell you, though, is that if you're going to use subdomains, the email address actually when created in the subdomain, needs to be a real full mailbox. In fact, whether it's the subdomain or the main domain, you want the email address that you are mailing from to be a real working mailbox, not an alias, not an alternative address, not anything other than a full-fledged mailbox. That's important. So here in an example of what a subdomain is, you can see right here the hs.zerobounce.net. This is the meeting link. By the way, this is the meeting link for today's webinar. At the end, we'll have it. But if you do want to book a call with me, that's where it's going to be. And in this example, hs is the subdomain of zerobounce.net. You might also see them in email addresses. For example, you might see Luke at hello.zerobounce.net, where hello is a subdomain of zerobounce.net. Subdomains basically work the same as a folder or a directory in the my documents, right? So you have your my documents, then you make a folder, maybe it says work, and then in there you put all the files for work. A subdomain is basically the same thing. It's a folder on your website that has its own address that you can get to it so that you can put different types of content in there. So how do the mailbox providers see subdomains? Mailbox providers will treat different subdomains differently. However, when you're first launching it, they're going to treat it like a new sender on the block. So just like with your main domain, or if you're changing systems, when you start doing the subdomain, you should do a warm-up type procedure where you send more and more mail from the subdomain, starting with the best subscribers you have the most engaged. When subdomains have good behavior, they are much more likely to land in the inbox, just like any sending domain. And in some ESPs, they might refer to subdomains as like email sending domains. HubSpot is one that uses that. And of course, just like any other sending domain, whether it's a main domain, a TLD, subdomain, you need to have that authenticated. And we will go in a later slide a little bit about how to get that done. So what is one of the advantages of using this? Well, when you have one domain, everything goes to that. And if you have one bad campaign, that can upset the reputation of the main domain. And then what happens? What happens is that can cause junking for all mail sent from that same domain. That might include your regular company mail. That might include transactional messages. That might include whatever's being sent, right? It's the average of everything on that main domain. So using subdomains kind of allows you to put like a canary in the coal mine where you will see a problem at the subdomain level before it impacts your main domain and takes out company mail. And of course, people marking things as spam don't really care what kind of email it was. And when everything's mixed together, it makes it harder to figure out where is the actual problem. And I even talked about this in one of my previous webinars with DMARC, where when you use subdomains to align different types of mail streams, if there is an issue you detected in the DMARC reports, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what system it came from. So not all emails will behave the same, and that's okay. Certain emails are going to have really high engagement. Other emails are going to have lower engagement. Some emails are much more likely to get complaints and as a result get junked. So by using different subdomains, you can kind of separate by the priority of the email that you're sending what is the thing we want to be able to protect, and what are the things that are more risky that maybe we should put on their own island, so if something goes wrong with them, they don't impact everything else, right? I can still deliver my main emails. I can still reach out to my customers, things like that. Because you want to protect your brand and your sender reputation, and you don't want one bad campaign to tank everything. So when you have subdomains, it'll affect the subdomain first so that you can take action before it spreads. And that also allows you to keep your most important emails stay trusted and your brand reputation stays clean, because they're not being polluted with these other bad emails. So subdomains are one of the things that can lead you to a stronger and more stable deliverability. So let's get a little bit out into that, right? So you have different types of emails, right? Promotional emails, newsletters, they each have their own kind of purpose and flow and cadence to them. And each can earn its own reputation. And using the subdomains also allows you to have cleaner signals, happier inboxes, fewer inbox headaches, especially if something does go wrong. Right? I meant to exclude my unsubscribes today, and I mistakenly mailed to them, and I had a massive rash of spam complaints as a result. Well, if that was sent from a subdomain, the subdomain is going to take the big deliverability hit, but the rest of your domain will be okay, provided you fix it right away. I would say that subdomains between other top-level domains or other subdomains work more like a fence than a wall, right? There could be some bleed through, and if something negative goes on long enough, or something positive goes on long enough, there will be some reflection of that across the different domains and subdomains that you have. Another reason to use this tactic is to avoid using what people call sister domains or cousin domains. If you have a ton of domains and you're mailing from it, that looks like an old school spammer technique called snowshoeing. And some of the ISPs and block list operators look for that. And if they see it, they will block your mail, right? Snowshoeing was this thing where a spammer would register a brand new domain, go sign up for every free account he can get, and then just pump out a lot of spam. And then when it would get blocked, because of course it would, within a short amount of time, the ISPs would catch them. They would just turn around and register another one and another one and another one. And eventually they could get some of the old ones unblocked, put them back in the cycle, and they basically are just kind of cycling through a large number of domains and often even a large number of IP addresses. This technique was called snowshoeing. Spamhaus, for example, has a nice definition of it, an article about what snowshoeing is. And so subdomains help you avoid the appearance of that. There are many times where having different things, different streams or different types of mail associated with different subdomains makes a lot of sense. There are even times when having more than one domain makes sense. For example, brands, right? Procter & Gamble has a Procter & Gamble domain. I believe it's png.com. But they also have a separate domain for like Tide and another one for some of their other products, right? In their case, that makes sense. However, if everything is using the same name, then subdomains makes a lot more sense, from a branding perspective and keeping everything kind of confined. When things go wrong, subdomains can save you, right? What happens with subdomains, right, is things that go wrong, like a rash of spam complaints, poor engagement. This is particularly something I see with cold outreach, where we're emailing people that we have fuzzy or maybe no permission. And so we tend to get lower open and click rates. We tend to get more likely to get complaints. That can certainly hurt your sender reputation. By moving that to a subdomain, you can help to preserve the better sender reputation for your other mail streams like newsletters, promotions, internal company mail. Now, so when something goes wrong there, it'll affect the subdomain first. You see that, and that alerts you to the fact that, hey, we need to do something about this. Something has gone wrong. Maybe what you need to do is call our deliverability services and talk with me. But you want to address that. And this way, you find out, because it affects the subdomain before it affects the main domain or maybe another subdomain. This way, you can take action before it takes down all your mail. And that's why I compare some degree within as like the canary in the coal mine. And now we're going to talk about some of the requirements. So I have a question in the poll here for you. If you have a subdomain in the top domain, if you have SPF or DKIM in the top domain, does it cover the subdomain? And this is a true or false question. So let's see how I'll answer to. How many people are wondering, does it actually cover the subdomain? Okay, so a few of you are voting. I'll let that go while I move on to the next slide, and we'll check in with you. But it looks like so far about 1 out of 4 people say true, 3 out of 4 say false. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to find out. All right, so here's some tips for subdomains. The first tip I would give you is use a logical name that helps identify the types of mail, right? This is nice when you're looking at reports because you know what system it came from. When you're making up a subdomain name, you could use a single letter. I have certainly seen just T or E dot domainname.com before, but the best practice is to use more than that. I would recommend 2 to 5 characters for a subdomain. Don't make it super long. Remember, a lot of times people have to type this in. If it's really long, then it's much more likely that I will make a typo. And the answer to our poll question is it true and false is subdomains do not inherit SPF or DKIM. You must publish those DNS records within the subdomain. So you will often have a SPF or DKIM record for the main domain, and then you'll have another record for the subdomain. Sometimes they can be pretty much the same, or they might be different, depending on how you're using the subdomains and what systems are there. Subdomains can inherit DMARC, and you can use the SP policy, the SP value, I guess we'll call it, to set the policy for all the subdomains, all right? So I talked about this in my DMARC webinar a couple episodes back. I like to have a DMARC record published in my subdomain because then I can control just that subdomain's policy versus another subdomain or the main domain's policy. When you use the SP, which stands for subdomain policy, that sets it for every subdomain underneath your domain. So why would I want to have a separate one for a specific subdomain? Well, maybe I'm migrating to a new system and the new system required a subdomain. I don't want to start out at reject while I'm trying to set it up because I may not have had a chance to put up my SPF and DKIM records yet. Or maybe I'm trying to see if they're really working right, or do I have the right entries? So I like to have that as when I'm first bringing on a subdomain, have that policy set to none. The other thing is if I set a policy in the DMARC record for a subdomain that will override the policies from the main domain or any other DMARC records I might have around. The other thing is that when it comes to producing your DMARC reports, the DMARC reports will break out by the different subdomains if you make a record for each one. So then when you're looking at them, instead of them all being lumped into thousands, if not millions of emails sent during a month, and you're trying to figure out, well, what is this authentication failure that I need to go fix? Because I know I'm not complying with sender guidelines if my SPF and DKIM are failing, but I'm not really sure what system it is. So the subdomains help you figure that out, right? Because then it reports on that. If the subdomain is, this is my subdomain for marketing email, and there's failures there in my DMARC reports, I know where I need to go look is the system that sends my marketing email. Right? It makes it a lot easier to figure it out. And that's one of the reasons why you would use it in DMARC. So when you're creating a subdomain, in this example, I show a screenshot of the DNS zone editor for cPanel, which happens to be my own. You can see that in this example, I'm creating an SPF record for the subdomain mktg@glassdoor.com, which stands for marketing, and I'm going to send marketing mail from here. And I put in a little dummy SPF record as an example. You can also see that there are different subdomains already existing. For example, www, the common place for a website to be hosted, is a subdomain. In fact, if you are on shared hosting, $10 says that your account is a subdomain of like all clients or the hosting provider, and then they map your stuff to that specific subdomain. And yes, you can host things within a subdomain and map everything to that subdomain, and then have it appear as the main domain in the URL in your browser. And these are probably the three most common subdomains created at any host, which are mail, www, and FTP. Mail is the default subdomain for any mail server. And this is why I often tell people, if you're setting up a subdomain to use for marketing mail, don't use the word mail, because that's maybe reserved for the mail server itself. Now, if you outsource mail to, say, someplace like Google Workspace, you might notice that when you log in, it says mail as their URL, right? So the URL for Gmail is mail.google. And that's one of the reasons why I usually try to stay away from that, for using it for other things than an actual hosted mail server, because that can be confusing. And typically, if you went to that, that would be how you could get to a webmail client like Gmail, or maybe you have one from your host or whatever. I also noticed for a while doing DMARC that the word news was very popular for spoofing attempts. I've also seen a lot of things related to like orders or secure or similar like order processing things. Those are typically the legitimate ones, are often used for that. And if you don't have that, spoofers will try to fake that. So for anyone who doesn't know, spoofing is when someone pretends to be your domain and sends mail in the hopes that anything negative as a result of their spamming will track back to you instead of to them. And as I mentioned before, avoid using long subdomains. It just makes it a lot harder for everyone to type it in. There are certain filters that look for unusual gobbledygook names in subdomains. I would avoid that as well. You know, some examples of subdomains that do well, you might sales, hello, EML, or the word email for email. I've also seen EM. Those are some pretty common subdomains that I often see across people's DMARC reports or working with clients over the years. So what's the deliverability difference here? So what actually gets better when you use subdomains? Well, one of the first things that usually gets better is if the majority of your mail comes from your top level domain and it's highly engaged, like your internal company mail or maybe certain types of mail streams, by moving less relevant mail to its own subdomain, that will improve its reputation, because now we're not mixing in inactives or higher spam complaints with it. Another thing is that every subdomain has to own its own trust on its own timeline, right? I mentioned that if you are launching a subdomain or starting with them, that you should do a warm-up procedure. And I believe we will actually teach you about warm-up procedures in another Inbox Answers episode. But the point here is that don't just turn on the subdomain and just start mailing away at your full volume, especially if your volume is fairly high. You want to work your way into it. Start with your most engaged people so that you put your best foot forward when you're starting out the reputation for that subdomain, and then move ahead with larger and larger sends. Most people can do that within a month. If you're mailing from subdomains and it didn't have authentication in it, by putting it there, now authentication works with you instead of against you, right? And we all know that as of last year, not only did they all announce that they want authentication, whether it's Microsoft or Apple or Google or Yahoo or anyone they do mail for. By the way, Yahoo does mail for a lot of people. It's not just Yahoo. It's also AOL, a lot of telephone companies, and cable ISPs, things like that. They're all really Yahoo on the back end. And all of them require authentication, and all of them enforce it now. I mean, to be honest, they've said about requiring it for over a year now, but as we've gone on from that, I have seen enforcement getting tougher and tougher, people actually getting mail bounced and junked as a result. If you want to do testing or tweaking or do different things, subdomains might help there, because if the thing goes off the rails, it's confined to the subdomain and it doesn't break anything else other than other places. So by setting up subdomains, they also help you to set up for success. And this is it's not hard to set up subdomains, right? It's fairly easy. The important thing is to remember, you want to put the authentication records within the subdomain. Now, when you create that in DNS, typically you just write the subdomain. It normally will automatically append the rest of your domain name. So when you create those records, if you published it, by the way, the moment you publish it, you can do a lookup and see that the record is there. It won't be propagated across the internet, as people like to say, but it will be there, and you will be able to query it immediately to check it. If it doesn't come back, double check your DNS entry. Did it append the domain name on the end of your own domain name? Because I've seen that happen plenty. And then so you could fix that by deleting the extra instance of your domain name, and now everything works magically. Yay. These are how some different things go along with subdomains. And if you have any questions about how using subdomains, is subdomains right for you, you can certainly ask them here. You can certainly reach out. I'm happy to talk about subdomains. And now, so what are some ways that ZeroBounce can help? Well, I already mentioned, obviously me and our deliverability services. Another thing that I usually tell people is the best time to do a list hygiene is right before you try to warm up anything, right? So whether it's I'm migrating or I'm trying to do a warm up procedure to kind of what I call restorative warm up, where I'm trying to reset my sender reputation, that's a good time to clean your list. And another good time is at the beginning of the year. So now, right? This way, everything's nice and clean. You have a much better chance of reaching the inbox. You have a much better chance of establishing a good reputation. You can use our inbox placement test, especially when you're just starting out, to see where your emails actually land, not just, where you think or hope they land, right? So you can do that by using our inbox placement test. You can also check that you have the subdomain configured properly using our email server test. Chances are the subdomain won't have its own special reverse DNS record, so I wouldn't get overly upset about that as long as it exists at the top level domain. You can spot authentication and DMARC issues easily and hopefully before a mailbox provider spots them and starts junking them. Like a couple glitches in authentication here and there aren't going to kill you, but having a lot or having a whole stream from a certain subdomain, yeah, you're going to get bounces, you're going to get junked. So make sure that you check those reports and understand what's going on there. So what are our key takeaways today? So subdomains keep your reputation out of trouble by separating different types of mail and allowing you to act on a problematic mail stream before it affects all the rest of your mail. As a result, the other things often have better deliverability, fewer surprises. I wouldn't recommend making a ton of subdomains. In fact, you don't want tons of domains or subdomains at really low volume. That takes forever to warm up. It takes a long time to build sender reputation and trust. So just make the ones you need. And then start small, monitor, and scale with performance. If everything's going good, I can send more. If everything's going bad, I shouldn't increase volume or I should step down in volume. And we'll get more into some of those things when we get to our warm-up episode. And of course, turn to your ZeroBounce One account to help with these different things, such as the validation, the inbox tests, DMARC monitoring. If you're sending DMARC reports to yourself, I would strongly recommend that you use us or any processor and actually look at what those say. When you do a lookup in a tool where it checks whether the record exists, that doesn't tell you whether you're really passing authentication. It tells you that you wrote the record right. You have to go look at the DMARC report to see whether it really passes. Or if you're good at it, you can also look at the headers. If you happen to use a Google like Workspace or Gmail, if you view the source of an email, it actually says right at the top, past SPF with IP, whatever your IP address, past DKIM with signing domain. Like it flat out says it clearly. You don't have to scroll through all the headers and try and find it. That's one thing I do like about their email clients. And now we're going to open it up for questions and answers.
All right. Very good information, Luke. And we've got some great questions from some people here. We will start with this one. This is from Robert. In using subdomains, are you better defining a separate DMARC with a unique P equals value or using SP equals on the root domain DMARC?
Either can be fine provided you use the right settings. I personally do prefer using the separate DMARC with its own P value, even if I end up having those P values. I mean, my goal in DMARC is to get everything to P equals reject, right? That's the best setting. That's the one that works with BIMI, things like that. But on my road to getting there, I usually want my own record in the subdomain, and having the records in the subdomain gives you more control and makes it easier to filter things in the report. So there are definite advantages to doing that way, and that's why I prefer that way. But there either is right. It's not like one's wrong. It's just which do you prefer?
All right. And then this one comes from Morgan Purdy. What do you mean by sister or cousin domains? Can you share an example?
So sister or cousin domains is when I register a different domain name that's related. So like you might have a ZeroBounce.net and a ZeroBounce.com. Or an example for this, I'm actually the Cub Scout leader in town. I have MontvaleCubScouts.com and MontvaleCubScouts.org. .org is the website for the members. .com used to go to a storefront for people to pay for campouts and things like that. That was actually a square site.
All right. So we have another one from Robert. Let's see here. For your information, we send millions of emails a month on behalf of clients. What would the upside versus downside of us setting up separate domains for each of a client might share one of our primary sending domains versus just sending emails for all clients via a single subdomain?
That example is one of the best use cases for why you would use subdomains. Some of those clients are going to be better rep and better mailers than others, right? Also, when you want to figure out things for a specific client, right, you can have like client1.yourdomain.com, client2.yourdomain.com. Now, I know these are the mailings that went with that client. These are the mailings that went with that client. They're going to be different in my reports in my ESP. If I have to report that back to the client, I'm going to be able to clearly see which client that mailing went to. I can clearly see which ones are, for their DMARC or any authentication that I might have to set up for them. But to me, one of the biggest things is that if I ever need to give them any kind of access, right? Like, for example, a hosting company. A hosting company gives access to a specific subdomain to host your website. And when you log in, you can only see your stuff and down. right? You can't move back up in the tree and then come down on a different client, right? So another reason in that kind of a situation might be access control so that one client can't view another client's stuff, especially if you're giving them any kind of access to send on their own. That is probably the number one use case for why you would use a subdomain.
Good question. This one comes from Lane. Is it good or bad to set up multiple subdomains for each of your main email sending types, like newsletter.glassner.com and events.glassner.com, etc.?
If there's enough volume to support it, yes. I mean, like if there's really going to be very little volume, then I would probably use just the top domain for that. But any type of marketing, and especially any cold outreach, sales outreach, anything like that, I would definitely put in its own subdomain because you know that that's going to end up having problems, whether they're sooner or later. And when they do, then it's going to take out the mail for the whole company, and you don't want that.
Just want to call everyone to the attention here. There's this QR code. If you would like to book a consultation, you can do that, and we would love to get that going for you. And there's a follow-up question from Lane. mtg.glassner.com. Does the words MKTG or marketing being included in a subdomain for sending emails make it more likely to get caught in spam traps or have deliverability issues?
Okay, so the answer here is, I mean, if you have a good sender reputation, it shouldn't matter. If the subdomain is sending wanted and relevant mail, you won't have any issue, no matter what you name it. There are people out there that have said avoid certain words, like an example, sales, promo, that those might get picked up in a content filter. And sure, they might get a tenth of a point out of, 50 that you need to get to spam, or 5. But I would say I would focus much more on having the clean mailings with strong engagement. That will do a lot more to get you past a spam filter versus what words you used, right? That's usually the content filter is usually the last place I look. If I have already figured out, like, okay, they don't have any authentication issue. Okay, the mail is doing well in terms of sender reputation, and the domain has a strong rep. So then, after I've eliminated those two, then I look at what is the content of the email. But since this comes up all the time, I'll give you a few tips. I could tell you there's a certain ISP that looks like a fruit with a bite out of it that doesn't like explanation points. They all seem really to hate overuse of all caps. I also wouldn't go super crazy with emojis. That's another one.
Interesting stuff. This one comes from Serene Benson. Does using generic subdomain names like hello, marketing, events, etc., make it easier to be identified as marketing or promotional?
I suppose in theory it could, but honestly, they're going to read the whole email either way.
Hmm.
And the algorithm, if you ever look at any of these like rule sets, which by the way, if you get to see one, it'll be really rare. That'll be a career highlight for you. But when you look at them, there are hundreds of rules in their algorithms and their machine learning or AI that determines placement. And a lot more of those rules are based on historical and recent engagement, complaints, and how people interact with your mail than they are based around things like content or coding. That doesn't mean that there aren't rules related to that. It's just that I would focus on sending engaging, relevant mail over wordsmithing. Because if I have a strong reputation, I can write whatever I want and be remembered. I did that one time with someone where I literally wrote a email that was a string of swear words and delivered it to them, no problem. That definitely should have set off every content filter out there. But my reputation was wonderful, so it didn't matter. However, if my reputation is not so great, that's where those kind of things come into play because I'm already on the line of being marked as spam. And then if I break a few content filter rules, that pushes me over the line. But it's always better to focus on rep and use the wording you need. There's lots of industries out there where you're going to use what they call as bad words or trigger words, right? Like if I work in any kind of, if I'm a bank, if I do any kind of debt collection, like, yeah, I'm going to get flagged for those words a lot. But like, that's the business. And sometimes I'm required to put certain disclaimers and things in there that I have to. So how do I overcome that? Strong sender reputation by having relevant and engaging things. I would also, of course, clean your list because you don't want to have a bunch of bounces or bad addresses and things like that, or send into random catch-alls that nobody really reads. Focus there, and the other stuff will come.
This one, to confirm, does the root domain and the subdomain need their own valid DMARC, SPF, and DKIM records?
Yes, and definitely for the SPF and DKIM, those specifically do not inherit. Inherit means it reads the one in the domain above it. The DMARC one can, but I gave, my reasons why I like it as its own record within the subdomain. But the SPF, if it's not published in the subdomain, that will fail, and the same for DKIM. So make sure you have those two. Sometimes, especially for SPF, you can literally just copy and paste the record from one to the other, especially if you have dedicated IPs. The IP doesn't change, right?
Then we have this one. When starting out with subdomains, what are the common issues to expect or keep in check?
Well, just like whenever you're doing any kind of warm-up type thing, well, first, check that everything is authenticating properly. Look at send mail to yourself and look at the headers. Use our email server test to check it out. Maybe you have another lookup tool that you like. Send a few emails and go look at the DMARC reports. Make sure that it is really authenticating, because if it's not, that will be a problem when it comes time to deliver. The next thing is, as you move volume into that subdomain, keep an eye on it. If you start to see like a massive drop in opens, you probably got jumped. You might want to run some inbox placement tests and see who's giving you an issue and where you need to fix it. But those are probably the two most common issues: is the authentication wasn't really done, or there was something went wrong with it. The other most common issue is probably engagement with the new subdomain. You might want to let people know, hey, we've changed our sending address. Please add the new one to your address book to make sure that we're being delivered. Or if they use any kind of rules where they file mail in certain folders and those kind of things. Changing the email address might impact those rules. So give a heads up to your subscribers that you're going to start sending from this. And you might want to do that like the previous mail from the old domain and then the new one. And that is the same whether we're talking about subdomain, a new subdomain that I'm just starting out because I want to do this, or maybe I'm migrating to a new system. It's very similar.
And that takes us to this one from Gabby. This might be our last question. We'll see. When would you say is the right time to start adding subdomains to our emails?
Any time can be the right time. But I would say, especially when you're starting with the new system, that confines everything to there. So I'm moving from, I don't know, one ESP to another, or hey, we just brought on a new e-commerce engine to power our website, and we have different. The transactional mail is going to start coming from there, and it's going to be different. As part of that, you'll want to set up a subdomain. If you are sending from one domain today and everything is lumped under the main domain or the TLD, the top level domain, you might want to think about starting that in the near future, because then you can separate things out, especially if you're already having problems, right? If you're getting people saying, I'm going to junk, and it's regular, like someone you correspond with in business regularly, then it might be time to think about, oh, something's like, it's not your regular day-to-day emails with fellow employees, customers, clients, etc. That's going to be the problem, right? Like those people respond. Um, it's some other type of mail stream. And so if you're starting to see problems there, might be a good time to think about putting one of those other mail streams, such as marketing or cold outreach, into its own subdomain. And by the way, I wouldn't put cold outreach and marketing in the same subdomain unless you don't really have enough volume to support having its own. When I say that, enough volume, what's enough volume? Tens of thousands a month. If you're in the thousands, it takes quite a long time to send enough volume to establish the domain reputation. And that's something I see a lot with people. They start sending cold email. The reality is they're really not sending that much. So what happens is it seems like everything's going along fine. And then one day, bam, the anvil comes down and it seems out of the blue. But what the reality is it was happening all along, but the volume wasn't enough to actually trigger a response from the ISP. And so that means a problem could have gone on for quite a while before it actually gets responded to by the ISP. And then it seems like it takes you out of the blue and hurts you. And so that's one of, that's one of the things to think about when you're using these things is there enough volume to support it? Because if there isn't, then you might get the surprise attack out of the left field.
So just a comment here from Gabby. She says, thank you for the thorough answer, Luke. Truly appreciate it. And I think that's a good time to thank all of you for coming to today's webinar. It's always a pleasure. And as she said, Luke, you are a great resource for information about all things email. And this is not the end. It's the end today, but we're going to be continuing the series. We've got episode 6 coming up next month. It's going to be on March the 10th. You can register. You just go to that QR code right there. And yeah, it'll be the penultimate episode from this series. Any last words here or anything you feel you may have left out, Luke?
I would just invite everybody to one. I mentioned a lot about this upcoming one as well as the DMARC one. You can see those. You can go watch those. The past ones you can watch on our YouTube channel. Be sure to check some of them out. And, don't be afraid to book a call. Reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about email. We're here to help. And anything we can do, we're happy to answer your questions.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to warm up. I think I see more emails about warm up, more comments from people about warm up. So that promises to be a good one. Thank you all for joining. And thank you, Luke, for the great information.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody for coming today. Have a great day.
All right. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right.